Earlier this year, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, having an argument with Margaret Brennan, I think it was, from CBS about the vetting of these Afghan asylum seekers. And it was just almost taboo to suggest that they weren't all carefully vetted and an asset to the country when, obviously, when you're bringing in plane loads in a crisis with the Taliban taking over the country, of course there's going to be people who are not properly vetted, Douglas.
And you know, that really points, Rita, to one of the problems that not just America, but every developed country has these days with our asylum and immigration policies, which is, I don't think in any country pretty much, maybe by now Denmark, but almost no country in the West has a suitable facility for checking people, for screening them, and let alone for integrating them. I mean, just last week we spoke about the Somali community in Minneapolis. Thousands and thousands of people from perhaps the most war-torn country, if you can call it a country, in the world that's been in just unbelievable civil war and strife and violence and unrest for decades now. Were all of the Somalis who allowed into the US, as allowed into Europe, carefully screened and individually vetted? Is there any facility to do this? Does anyone know how you screen people to make sure, for instance, in the case of the Somali community, that they're not committing massive welfare fraud and sending money back that's American taxpayer money to people at home, including members of al-Shabaab and other al-Qaeda-linked jihadist groups? Is there any way to check that of the tens of thousands of Afghans, none of them are going to go, as the president put it, cuckoo, and shoot dead a woman who's serving her country in the American capital? And I think the answer to that is no. And we should have such systems. We certainly should have such systems if we're going to bring in very large numbers of people to Western countries at this speed.
Well, President Trump is certainly not mincing his words, Douglas. In a lengthy statement on Truth Social, he had this line, which I thought was very interesting. He said, "Even as we have progressed technologically, immigration policy has eroded those gains and living conditions for many." Douglas is framing this as an America First issue, arguing that his first responsibility is to Americans, not to those who may be fleeing failing nations, who may even be genuine asylum seekers. He seems to be drawing a line that American living standards and what's good for people already in America should be the top priority.
Well, I mean, to my mind, that's absolutely straightforward common sense, and any elected leader of any country should be putting their own citizens, their own taxpayers, as the priority. I mean, that's just absolutely basic common sense. The thing that follows on from this, though, and the question which I think all of us of any political side or none has to think about, is one I have tried to make people address, or even just think about, for many years now, which is, even if you take all of the people in the world who would have or could have a legitimate claim to find asylum, a need to have asylum, can the developed countries of the world take them in? And the answer to that is obviously no. There are millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of people in the world, in the developing world, who live in conditions where they are not free, where they do not have freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and all of the other things we take for granted in countries like Britain and Australia and America. They don't have the right to the most basic things. Many of them are persecuted. Just look at any Christian minority in the Arab world and the Muslim world, and you can see that. There are hundreds of millions of people. That's even before you get onto the people who are just in a terrible economic situation, and you know, you can say that they seek a better life, and that means they should have asylum. Can all of the people in the world who are living worse lives than we do come into our countries and our countries remain recognizable at all? And the answer to that is obviously not. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the land space, we don't have the welfare or the budget for it. We don't have any of it. That's even before you come onto the social issues. So I'm afraid that, what we're seeing at the moment, in part, is a response to the people who have presumed for more than a generation that it is although yes, there are extreme cases of asylum that governments across the developed world can put in place, the incredibly specific ones, Yazidis fleeing actual genocide in the 2010s, for instance. You can look into that. Whether or not, by the way, that means that all those people should stay is another question. After all, look at the Syrians who fled by the millions, and now their country is at peace. Are they going to return? Well, millions of them had actual asylum claims. Millions of them came to other countries. Have millions of them returned? No. And so, what we're seeing at the moment is the response to a period that, frankly, was just la-la land, and in which government upon government just did not have the facilities they needed in place to even vet the people coming in. It doesn't matter which country you look at, Canada, America, Australia, Britain, France, Italy, Germany. We're all suffering from the same problem, and it's a problem that comes after a period of mass delusion and self-deception.
Well, you wrote about this in The Strange Death of Europe. You gave the world the warning, and sadly, a lot of world leaders were not listening. Now, you wrote a fantastic piece for The Telegraph about why culture matters. We have too many conservatives, particularly conservative politicians in this country, who think that the key battles are all about the economy, but it's really cultural issues that are often the most consequential. And a man who understood that was former TV executive turned founder of the New Culture Forum, the late Peter Whittle, who passed away last week, Douglas, and it's an enormous loss. He really understood this battle.
Yes, he did, absolutely. I'd known Peter for a couple of decades and more, and watched as he started the New Culture Forum 20 years ago. He was a terrific force in British national life. He entered politics, and most importantly, he founded the New Culture Forum. And it was his insight a long time ago that other people have also been credited with, but I mean, he really practiced it, that it is the case that politics is downstream from culture. And, a lot of what we've seen in recent years in all of our countries, whether it's a turmoil to do with mass immigration, whether it's all of the self-doubt that's been pushed on our nations, all the guilt that's been pushed on our nations, all of this stuff has been a kind of cultural war on our countries. And it has relatively little, at times, certainly, to do with economics. You can always get the left to talk about culture, and sometimes you can get the right to talk about economics. But Peter recognized that the right needs to talk about culture. And that includes not just what you're against, but what you're for. Not just what you don't want to see, but what you do want to see. Peter was intensely proud of British and especially English culture. He wasn't one of those people, he didn't think that we should all look down on what we'd inherited. He was proud of it. He was particularly proud of what the working classes in the UK had given through their hard work, labor, and much, much more that had created the culture which we inherited in Britain. And he didn't want to give it up. He didn't want to see it handed away. And so, yes, he for 2 decades, he founded an organization that has spread now across the United Kingdom, in which people come together, not just to say what they don't like about the things that are coming up in the arts and architecture and so on, but to celebrate, revere, and carry on the things in our culture which are good. I wish that many more people did that, but I hope with the inspiration that Peter, among others, has given us, I hope that more people will pick up the baton going forward.
And on that, on the importance of culture and the left's march through the institutions, I want to ask you about the subtle and not so subtle ways that leftist ideology has captured institutions, particularly at the moment, the trans ideology. Another example, the NHS insisting on using terms like people with a cervix. as opposed to just women, which would make it a lot simpler in these health messages. And we're seeing people in the corporate world still submit to this ideology by putting pronouns, for example, in their bios or their email addresses. What's your response to someone who does that just to go with the crowd or to appear tolerant?
Well, my impression is that the days where you have to say Rita brackets she, her, Douglas brackets he, him. I think, although neither of us ever fell into that era, Rita, and I'm very proud that we didn't, nevertheless, I think the era where people thought they had to do that is definitely receding. I don't know about you, but I certainly see it a lot less. You give the example of people with cervixes. What we really have seen, among other things, on this is not just a mass derangement, it's a product of mass miseducation. Nobody who knows the most basic biology could think that just any old person can have a cervix. Unfortunately, of course, Rita, as I think you and I have mentioned before, one of the people who does think that a man can grow a cervix, given the right medication, is our now Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, David Lammy. An absolute genius. And when he was asked on a show some time ago, but can somebody born a man, can they actually become a woman? And he said, well, I think they can. And yeah, I mean, if you have the right. And they said, can they get a cervix? He said, yes, I think they can grow a cervix. These, Rita, are our leaders.
Wow.
You can't expect kids in schools to know basic biology if we're led by people who think that we're kind of pieces of Lego on which you can just stick bits and then take them off. And it's so deranging, so ridiculous. But as I say, I think that era might be receding.
Well, let's hope so. Sadly, it's still very prevalent in this country. We've kind of still haven't had the awakening to this, the excesses of the trans movement. We're still handing out puberty
maybe
blockers.
Somebody could, maybe, Rita, you or somebody else could ask your Prime Minister whether he believes he can grow a cervix. I mean, whether or not he wants to, I suppose, is another question. Maybe he could feel the temptation to. But just ask him if he thinks that's possible, if it could be on his agenda someday. And if he says that he could grow one, then we know we're dealing with an absolute idiot.
Well, we have a sex discrimination commissioner, Douglas, in this country who said that she doesn't understand terms like biological male. I think that's actually a direct quote. I don't understand terms like So her entire role as a sex discrimination commissioner, you would think, would be to protect the sex-based rights of women, yes. But she can't work out what exactly a woman is because it's all
who by the way,
very subjective.
Who on earth, who is a serious person, would take up the title of sex discriminator? That's a government appointment. I'm the official government appointed sex discriminator. Watch out, I might come knocking.
Sex discrimination commissioner who doesn't know what a woman is. That's Australia in 2025. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Great pleasure. Thank you.